הרדיו הבינתחומי. בינתחומי. 106.4 FM. הרדיו הבינתחומי. הרדיו החינוכי של המרכז הבינתחומי. לכל ישראל. 106.4 FM.
שולחן עגול, עם פאנל המומחים של המכון למדיניות נגד טרור. מנחה, דוקטור בועז גנור.
So here we are again with the round table of the Institute for Counterterrorism at the Interdisciplinary Center. This time we conduct this program in English because we have a distinguished guest coming from the United States, Professor Errol Southers. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Boaz. Pleasure to be here.
And we have the pleasure of having with us an expert. I will present both of them in a moment, but we have the pleasure of having with us the former Minister of Homeland Security in Israel, the former head of Shabak, Mr. Dichter. Welcome. Member of Knesset as well. And today the subject matter that we are going to discuss is the new trends and challenges in aviation terrorism. Well, we know that aviation terrorism has become, through the years, one of the more preferred, I would say, traditionally, terrorist weapon. And Israel, unfortunately, was regarded as a target of aviation terrorism since the midst of the 20th century, late 60s and on. Israel has ongoing great experience in dealing with aviation terrorism with quite a lot of success. Just recently we had the visit of Minister Napolitano, the DHS Minister of the United States, and although she seems to be impressed by the Israeli aviation security capabilities, she actually referred to that as less relevant to the United States. We will talk about that later on as well. What we're planning to do today is to describe the threat, to describe the challenge that aviation terrorism pose to the safety of the flights, the dilemmas in contending with this specific threat, and the Israeli experience and the relevancy of this experience for dealing with future trends in aviation terrorism. As I already briefly mentioned, we have today with us, and we are fortunate to have with us, two world authorities in this field. And I will first present my friend and my colleague, Errol Southers. Errol Southers is the Associate Director of National Center for Risk Economic Analysis of Terrorism Events, CREATE, at the USC in Los Angeles. He is an adjunct professor of Homeland Security and Public Policy at the USC, former presidential nominee for Assistant Secretary of the TSA. He was Governor Schwarzenegger Deputy Director in California Office of Homeland Security, former FBI Special Agent, former Chief of Homeland Security and Intelligence for Los Angeles World Airport Police Department. So, as you can see, he has quite a knowledge about the subject matter that we are discussing today. And I'm very proud to present another world authority, one of the most important authorities in Israel and in the world, member of Knesset Avi Dichter, which I'm very proud to say, another very close friend of mine. A member of Knesset Avi Dichter is a member of Kadima Party since 2006. He is the former Israeli's Ministries of Public Security, and currently he's serving as the chair of the Knesset Subcommittee for Defense Policy. And maybe at least when we talk about year times, definitely took most of his career. He was doing many positions, holding many positions at the Israeli Shabak, which is known as the ISA, the Israeli Security Agency, until he was leading this agency and was in the most difficult times of Israel, heading the Israeli Shabak. Thank you, Avi, for coming.
Good evening.
So, with no further ado, I would like to pose the first question, and Avi, I will pose the first question to you. And actually, I would like you to share with us your views about the nature of the threat of aviation terrorism. What are we facing today, the international community or Israel, whatever you prefer to refer to?
Well, to be honest, I started my career in Shin Bet as an air marshal in 1974. And I remember as an air marshal I was trained not far from the IDC here, and my trainer was an American guy named Dave Beckerman. He really was the expert in teaching Israelis how to use pistols. And I remember he put a sign above the entrance to our training center that says, after the legendary Samuel Colt, and it said, "Fear no man, no matter size, count on me, I'll equalize."
The equalizer, yeah.
And I really think that it indicates the softest point of countries in terms of terror attacks. I've never met in my life, and I'm 40 years in this business, I've never met such a soft point in defending people, softer than a passenger aircraft after taking off. And 9/11 occurred not as a mistake. It occurred as the toughest terror attack in the history. They got the biggest bombs that you can get, and a passenger aircraft with 100-ton fuel, with a steering that you can take it everywhere. And now all you have to decide is which target you are going to crash in. And that's why I think the main threat in terms of aviation is the passenger aircraft, or any other aircraft, but mainly passenger aircraft, that you can take it everywhere after you succeeded to take control on that passenger aircraft. So all the other targets, whether counters or passengers on the line before taking off or after landing, passenger aircraft on the runway, even missiles against passenger aircraft, you can shoot down a passenger aircraft with, let's say, 500, the biggest one, A380. So you can bring down 500 and something passengers. But if you have control on that passenger aircraft, so the number, we've seen it in 9/11.
Guided missile.
Therefore, I think that, and I hope that we are going to analyze 9/11 here today, I think it's very essential to understand what went wrong in protecting aviation passenger aircrafts in the U.S., why it was a failure, and why it works in other places in the world, mainly here in Israel.
Yeah, we'll definitely deal with that as well. You are talking about the fact that you are concerned with this soft belly, and as we can see from recent history, modern history, the terrorists are learning all the time about those soft bellies. They are trying to find new policies, new practices, new modus operandi, even new technologies that would surprise the counter-terrorists, and we see those efforts from time to time. If we will refer to the shoe bomber on one hand, or the underwear bomber on the other hand, or even recently the Al-Awlaki effort to launch printer attacks using so probably the other side, the enemy, also refers to that as a soft belly.
Yeah, but we all know that it becomes more and more difficult to bring into the plane a bomb, explosives, or whatever. And because the ground detection systems are getting more and more sophisticated, it makes it more and more difficult for terrorists to bring in all kinds of explosives. And I'm not going to dive into the details, what kind of explosives and what's the amount of explosives you need in order to bring down a passenger aircraft. But today we know that there are some other systems. If you suspect any kind of boxes, that the only way to detect it is to open it with a screw or whatever. So you can put it in an armored box, and even if it explodes, it doesn't make any damage. But again, once the passenger aircraft takes off, there's no way to change the situation within the aircraft if the bad guys are taking control, except in the movies Air Force One,
exactly.
that they come from other
If
planets.
Bruce Willis is there, then everything is different.
But it works only in Hollywood.
Yeah.
In real life, once it takes off, that's it.
Yeah.
And 9/11 was exactly that failure.
Yeah. Errol, I'm interested to take your take on that. Really, what are those trends from your perspective, and maybe even to refer to what Avi started to refer to, the failure in 9/11 in this respect?
Well, Avi's absolutely correct. The most important element is the human element. And what we are concerned about now, obviously, are in-flight incidents, whether we talk about explosives or whether we talk about surface-to-air missiles and bringing an aircraft down, but it's passenger aircraft that's the most desirable. It's interesting that in all of the years now, especially the last 10 years of attempts and attacks on aircraft, it's that in-flight incident that we do worry about. And he's absolutely correct. One of the things that we are challenged by is, as you do so well here, is trying to find the bomber instead of the bomb. And it seems like we find ourselves spending a lot of time and money and effort and technology in looking for devices instead of looking for those individuals who would try to get those devices on board, whether it be a box cutter or whether it be a shoe bomb. Someone has to transport it. So it's humans, and it's that human element that I think needs to be emphasized. And he's absolutely correct. It's those in-flight incidents that we're worried about. Once that plane takes off, you've got a weapon of mass destruction that on 9/11 became a guided missile and was extremely devastating, and of course the worst terrorist attack we've seen in our country's history.
Yes, and but what we see is even in the threat itself, when we talk about the threat to the aircraft itself, we see this development in which they need less and less sophistication. I mean, 9/11, you didn't need to smuggle in sophisticated explosive device at the end of the day. It was just with knives, and you have a guided missile in your hand. So the challenge to the security personnel is probably getting greater and greater every day.
Well, it is. And, you know, at any one point, I'll speak about the United States. Any one point, we have 5,000 aircraft in the sky over our country. Those are that many opportunities a day for those kinds of things to happen. So in the law of averages, in terms of risk, you have to at least admit that the security system must be doing something right. However, you're correct, and they've evolved. The threat has evolved. The methodology has evolved. What's interesting is that, of course, their number one goal is to kill people, injure people, but they understand the economic impact of an attack like this, and I think it's part of that reason that they continue to go after aviation. It's the most hardened infrastructure in the world since 9/11, and yet it continues to be a priority for them, and I think it's both loss of human life, economic disruption, and of course, if they're successful, what it speaks volumes to the rest of us is that they've been able to compromise an infrastructure that we've invested so heavily in protecting.
We have mentioned 9/11 as the worst aviation atrocity ever. And I wonder, I mean, sitting next to you, both of you, which held an official high-level position at that particular period of time, where have you been when 9/11 occurred? Maybe we'd start with Errol.
Well, interestingly enough, I was in the gym that morning. I was West Coast with a 3-hour time difference, and I grew up 25 miles away from the World Trade Center. And we heard it was a small plane that crashed into the first building, and I thought that was very odd because it's not on the flight path to JFK or LaGuardia Airport. And then a few minutes later, when we heard the second aircraft had crashed into the second tower, I went to work because I knew that it was more than that. And unfortunately, a year before the attack to the day, I was with a very dear friend in Orlando, Florida, filming a domestic counterterrorism tape. And he was the security director for the World Trade Center. And several hours later, called to see if Doug Karploff was still alive. And unfortunately, the last time they saw him, he was on a cell phone going into the building, ushering people out. And he gave his life that day, saving other lives.
Yes.
Never saw him again.
Avi, where have you been?
I was at my headquarters as head of Shin Bet at that time, and I remember the first smoke that we've seen, and we were told it's a small jet. I'm not that expert, but it looked to me a little bit strange. Such a small jet is causing such a big smoke. And I asked my people to look whether we have to give new precautions to the Israeli aviation, because we are in charge of it as Shin Bet. And then the second airplane crashed into the Trade Center, and it was well known that it's a terror attack. And right away we gave orders to all Israeli flights that are on the ground not to take off, and those who are on the air to take specific precautions. And because we have air marshals on every Israeli flight, it was easy to translate it into action item. I had another personal aspect, because my daughter was arrived just 2 weeks before to New York, and she rented an apartment not far from the Trade Center.
So how long did it take you to call her?
No, she called me and she said that I'm okay, I'm in the consulate, and we're taking care of the Israelis. But I think that we really understood that something very, very serious is happening in that very moment.
I also have a personal story to tell you about it, because at that time I was the director of ICT, the Institute for Counterterrorism here in Israel, but at that specific period of time I was sent by the Israeli Foreign Ministry to give a series of lectures and courses in United States, because the timing, if you remember, and I know you remember, Avi, it was the midst of the Intifada, the second Intifada. It was the a huge wave of Palestinian terrorist attacks against Israel, and maybe the peak years of suicide attacks in Israel. And the Israeli ministry, foreign ministry, asked me to share our experience, the Israeli experience, the Israeli concerns in contending with suicide terrorism. So I have a leaflet on my door here at IDC, which is an invitation to a lecture of mine under the title Stopping Suicide Terrorism, and the date is the 11th of September 2001 in San Francisco. You can imagine that this was a very popular lecture that I was giving on that very day.
I remember as the head of Shin Bet, I got some guests, business people in Israel, very well known, that came to me and said, just when I entered my job as head of Shin Bet, they knew that I was 2 years before, I was head of the Security and Protection Division after the assassination of Prime Minister Rabin. And I said, Avi, we think that the modus operandi of hijacking airplanes doesn't exist anymore, because the ground detection is so tough, and no need for air marshals. It costs a lot of money, and let's get rid of them. I told them, listen, my friends, as long as I'm head of Shin Bet, even if passenger aircraft will become UAVs, and on board it will be self-service with no cabin attendant, trust me, air marshals will remain on board.
Yeah,
after 9/11, nobody returned.
Thanks God, that was the decision. Actually, our personal experience bring me to the next question, which I've mentioned before. The Secretary of Homeland Security in the United States, Janet Napolitano, was just paying a visit to Israel. And she, among other things, visited the Israeli Ben Gurion Airport, the international airport of Israel, and she was impressed, as far as I can tell, from the Israeli security capabilities. But in a way, she was referring to that as if it is irrelevant to the American needs or the American challenges. And to put it in her words, she said, Israeli-style security won't work for the U.S. The reason that she gave is, at least when we talk about the quantity of the challenges in the United States. In Israel, she said that there is only one international airport in the United States. There are a few hundred. I don't know the exact number. I think it's about 300 or something like that. Yeah. So first of all, I would ask you, Errol, what is your reaction to that? Do you agree that this is irrelevant or less relevance to United States?
Well, I think part of the challenge with the statement was that it may have been taken slightly out of context, in that we have such an immense scope of aviation in that domain in the United States that we couldn't scale up to the level necessary to protect, and we got 450 airports there. And what I think was really meant was that we couldn't, of course, conduct the kinds of interviews that the selectors do here in our airports. I think what was missing, though, were all of the things that you do here so well in focusing on passengers and focusing on that human element that we could take to the United States and use. One of the things I applaud you on is certainly the dedication and focus of your personnel, which means you're obviously choosing well and you're training well. And I think that's a lesson learned for us. With all due respect to the TSA, we can do things better because you do it very well here. And if nothing else, it certainly is a deterrent for anybody who thinks they're going to come to the airport, try to get on board with a device or a weapon, knowing what they're going to be met with in terms of personnel that's going to be there to do their jobs and carry out their mission.
Yes. Avi, you shared with us your personal story that actually you have been selected, so you have been selected as being an air marshal in the beginning of your career, and definitely afterwards you have been one of those people who selected and was looking for these specific characteristics. What are the specific capabilities of Israel, the specific benefits that Israel can share with others, with United States and other nations in reference to aviation terrorism?
First of all, I beg to differ. I think that there's no difference just because we have a fleet of 30 passenger aircraft and the U.S. has a fleet of 30,000 passenger aircraft. I'm sure that if Boeing company and the Airbus company will decide tomorrow that flying a jet is so complicated that we need a third pilot, I can assure you that a third pilot will be positioned on every single flight, never mind how much it's going to cost. And in Israel in 1968, when the first El Al flight was hijacked to Algeria, Israel decided to protect every single Israeli flight, and since then we have air marshals. If we analyze 9/11, and in general, if I may elaborate a little bit, in security we have two rings. The first is intelligence. If the first one fails, I mean, it fails to bring, to feed you with the information, with the accurate information, so then you have the second ring. The second ring is the detection system, the detection machine, the sniffers, the people on the ground, everything. There's only one dimension that you need the third ring, and that's the passenger aircraft. As I said, once it takes off, that's it. Only those who are on board will solve the problem or fail to solve it. So let's analyze, with your permission, around 9/11. We had 19 terrorists who came aboard 4 passenger aircraft with nothing but bad intentions. No detection system on every airport that can detect bad intentions. You can detect if you suspect someone, so it takes hours. But on the line, to detect bad intentions, impossible. And they came aboard, and for, as you said, economic reasons, they saved the money and they didn't put air marshals. Now let's see what really happened and how much it really cost. I don't want to talk about the victims. 2,700 victims, some thousands of injured people. I don't know to evaluate it with money. Let's talk just about the 2 Trade Center buildings. What's in those 2 buildings? The Pentagon, 4 passenger aircraft, the improvement of the TSA system on the ground, which is dramatically changed after that. And all that is the small expenses. The real expenses is the decision to invade Afghanistan. According to what I've read, every single day of fighting in Afghanistan cost the U.S. $500 million. $500 million, multiple it with 365 days, 8 years, and now you understand what kind of a disaster we could prevent. I hope that the lesson was learned in the U.S. And I can assure you that if on those 4 passenger aircraft in 9/11 we have air marshals, trust me, no 9/11. We only had probably to give 4 medals. It could be gold, 28 karat, and a lot of honor, and terrorists that got killed or captured. I can remind you that in 1970, the PFLP, Palestinian Terror Organization, hijacked 4 passenger aircraft. 3, I think, to the TWA and some others were taken to Jordan and were exploded on the ground in Zarqa airport. The 4th one was a LAL flight from Amsterdam to New York. Layla Khaled and another terrorist. And only 1 air marshal activated because the 2nd one was in the cockpit, which was a failure. And the 2nd one just did his job. He killed the terrorist. And Layla Khaled, who's supposed to be the hero, was a chicken. She held 2 hand grenades with no safe. And she handed over it to the Sky Marshal. He put the safe, and that was the end of the terror event. Unfortunately, one of the cabin attendants got injured very badly.
Yeah.
That's the difference once you have air marshal on board and once you don't have it.
Okay, so we referred to the challenges in aviation terrorism. We talked about the atrocity of 9/11, and now I would like to move on and talk a little bit about counterterrorism, countering aviation terrorism. And again, it's a privilege to have with us both of you as world-renowned experts, and also people that dealt with this specific problem of aviation terrorism from different perspectives. And I would start by asking you, Avi Dichter, what are, in your view, the challenges of decision-making, I would say maybe in the federal level of United States or the Israeli state level, in trying to contend with this enormous danger?
Well, first of all, every country should understand the leaders, the commanders of those organizations who are in charge of, they have to understand that fighting terrorists is always can be done very efficient, very effective by states, because terrorists, they have a soft point. They have to cross borders, and every crossing is a soft point for terrorists. Therefore, the leaders of the country should think not as owners of a grocery, but as owners of a big outlet. And when we speak about crossing borders as a soft point of terrorists, we should understand, and I'm glad that the US started it, maybe the first country, to put a biometric system that forces you, if you are a terrorist, you are the only place that you have to stand by yourself in front of the state is at the crossings. And the state, represented by the immigration or whatever, or the customs, he sits in front of a computer that is connected with the Pentagon and the White House and the TSA and the CIA and the NSA all over. And he's the small terrorist. He knows that if he made a mistake, he's going to be catched. And that's the principle when you as a state work against terrorists. I remember when I was the head of Shin Bet, we had a debate because some of the Israelis, even high-ranking commanders, said, well, the terrorist has only an F-16 rifle. And an M16 rifle, you know, and he's an arch-terrorist. Let's try to catch him with, and I said, no. If he's an arch-terrorist, we should, as a state, we should work, if it's needed, to bring an F-16 jet against an M16 rifle. Don't look for a fair play once you fight against terrorists. You remember that if a terrorist came aboard a passenger aircraft and he's taking control on the aircraft, the damage can be dramatic. Therefore, I think that when we have to invest in more and more sophisticated tools at the airports, don't hesitate. if you need to charge more tax, $2 from each passenger, it will bring you in a year billions. And trust me, no passenger will say no if he knows that those $2 are going to increase the safety of his flight. And I think that the last point, and I refer to the point I mentioned before, don't think about air marshal as a nice to have. Pilots, cabin attendants, air marshals, engines of the airplanes, the wings,
and
the wheels are the same importance.
And the air marshals. Tell me, Avi, you refer to the crossing borders as a soft belly of the whole process, actually. And we all know that the strength of the chain is the strength of the weakest link.
Right.
And since we are having a phenomenon which is crossing border all the time, so you could be perfect in your security, but the airplanes which are coming into your state came from the weakest link, and they become a danger. How can you overcome such a problem?
Well, here we have to differentiate between the time that the plane lands until the terrorist comes to the gate. If he lands like we had here in Ben Gurion Airport in 72, yeah, they were suicide bombers. They took all rifles and hand grenades from the hand baggage and opened fire in the terminal and killed people. But today I think it's almost impossible. But once you have that crossing point, when even if they come 4 terrorists, 3 terrorists, 10 terrorists, at the crossing, each one has to stand in front of almost God. Mm-hmm. And the immigration, as I said, he is connected with everything. And the terrorist, even when he crossed the first gate and the taking off station, he doesn't know what's going to happen to him in the US or Israel or England or any other country. And if you are a well-experienced person in the immigration, and if you are a well-experienced person of the security in the airport, and you watch this person, whether by TV or with your eyes, and you suspect something, and there are some hallmarks that you can, according to them, to decide whether this man is a bit strange, a bit odd, and then you have to take him to the second level. Mm-hmm. Once you took him...
Based on the behavior recognition of the person.
Yeah, you take him to a second detection, and you know, once you behave with him in a different way, he's not well prepared for that. Mm-hmm. And try to remember, you have so many details in every passenger ticket that if you are smart enough, you can take from it almost everything.
Enormous information. Thank you, Avi. And now, Errol, the same question, the decision-making dilemmas and challenges, but in this case, I would ask you to refer to the state level, maybe the local level, maybe even the critical facility, the airport itself.
The challenge we have in the United States is that the airports are driven by what we call security directives, which are regulated by and disseminated by the TSA. So you've got the airport authorities and the airport police and the law enforcement agencies at those airports responding to security directives. Interestingly enough, you have to meet those directives, and you can do it with a public entity like TSA or in some airports like San Francisco where they have private security officers. At the end of the day, unfortunately, the aviation domain is a business. And you may see decisions made on how to allocate those resources based on purely business decisions. Mm-hmm. We were fortunate at LAX because we have such a high threat level to have the largest number of resources, counterterrorism resources in the United States. I dare to say that other airports that face similar challenges because of passenger loads and activity didn't have those kinds of capabilities because the decisions weren't made, they weren't attacked as often or plotted against as often. So that's interesting. But the other thing, too, Avi made a very interesting point. I'm actually surprised that we've not seen, as those circles of security have moved out from the cockpit to the airport, that we've not seen more Glasgow-type events because they've defaulted to attack the airports.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, what I think is that as we've hardened the cockpit, and we've got federal flight deck officers that are armed and crews that are trained and canines and explosive detection capabilities, advanced imaging technology, I see the same kind of utility in terms of affecting the system by attacking the airport. At the end of the day, what they want people to believe is unsafe to fly. So obviously the target is the aircraft. We want to be able to do something in flight. But I would imagine that there's going to be a ripple in the system if in fact you can attack an airport. Now Glasgow, to their credit, much like Israel, is very resilient, and they responded very quickly. They were able to take care of that incident. Planes went back into the sky. They recovered, and things went very smoothly. But I'm actually very interested in seeing if that phenomenon does not play out more often as time goes on, as this infrastructure, meaning the plane itself, and some of the airports become more harder or hardened as we go forward.
Let me ask you a difficult question. If you had $1 and you would need to invest in airport security, what would it be? Would you invest it in salaries for having a better manpower? Would it be training? Would it be technology?
I would invest it in selection. Training would be second. I'd pick the right person. My investment would be in the personnel.
You would do the same, Avi?
The extra dollar will put on air marshals.
Here we go again, the air marshals.
And you know, because if you look backward, all terror attacks at the airports, so you can get huge number of victims, injured people, but you'll never get the number you can get from an passenger aircraft. And terrorists, they have only one goal: to kill as many passengers, as many people as possible.
Right. Now I would like to refer to you another question. I mean, we are talking about something that concerns probably every state in the world today. How do you secure your air travel? How do you secure your airports, the aircraft, and so on and so forth? But in order to do that, probably necessarily, you find yourself in what we refer in the academic scholarly literature as the counterterrorism democratic dilemma. And the counterterrorism democratic dilemma is trying to find a balance between the two ends: efficiency in counterterrorism and security activity, and guarding liberal democratic values on the other hand. Like it or not, there is a contradiction between the two. You can be most effective in counterterrorism if you disregard liberal democratic values, and you can be most liberal and democrat if you don't care about countering terrorism, and you're not afraid or not in the risk of being attacked from those. The real art, in a way, or the real challenge is to find the golden bridge between the two ends of this specific scale. And I think that when we talk about aviation terrorism, in particular, the challenge is even more crystal cleared. And I would say that terms like ethnic profiling, which many democratic liberal states today are discussing, is one way of describing this democratic dilemma in aviation terrorism. And here I would like to take your answer in answering this maybe $1 million or $1 billion question. How can you find this golden bridge? How can you balance between the two ends of the democratic dilemma in reference to aviation terrorism? And maybe we'll start with Avi again.
Well, first of all, there is a principle that if you detect everybody to the same level, you detect nobody. Which means that you have no option, and you must decide whom you are detecting more profoundly and whom you detect less profoundly. And here you have to be very careful, because here the dilemma starts. Why to detect males more than females, young people more than older kids, and so on and so on. That's, I think, the most difficult issue, to decide whom you are going to detect more profoundly.
Give more attention to.
To give more attention, to send them to the more sophisticated tools, machines, CT machines or sniffers. And the reason why to send this one and not the other one cannot be a random system. It should be a system built on history, on background, on hallmarks, and on some kind of intuition. I don't think it's profiling. I think it's smartness, because in the numbers of passengers, and never mind if it's in the States or in Israel or in any other country, you have a limited number of passengers. It's between, let's say, 400 and something, the biggest ones, to some tens at the smallest airplane. And it's the same system. In every finger, or to every group of fingers, you have the well-known number of passengers. I think that the democracy in deciding who is going to be detected with better tools, and in second level or third level, that's some kind of professionalism that you need to have in your staff. If you have good staff, you can take risks. Allowing passenger to get into the aircraft is taking risks. I remember I once asked a security officer when we were in JFK, when do you understand that the flight is over and you go to rest? And he answered, until it lands in Israel. I said, no way. No way. If you sent the passenger aircraft and you're not sure about it, and you're still waiting to see whether the check was right or not, you failed in your mission. Mm-hmm. When you gave the green light to the aircraft to take off, it means that you are fully convinced that everything was done according to the rules, and bye-bye, we have another passenger aircraft.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Going back to the question of ethnic profiling, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that from an international perspective, they miscalculate the Israeli system, because they refer to it as if the Israelis are preoccupied with ethnic profiling. And if I would need to define the Israeli security policy in this respect, is behavioral recognition and not ethnic profiling, or more emphasis on behavioral recognition than ethnic profiling.
You know, I attended once an event in the States that a former general or higher ranking officer in the army said, just in front of the whole audience, that we cannot say that all terrorists, all Muslims are terrorists. But during the last 3, 4, or 10 years, he said, all terrorists found out as Muslims. I think that's the most dangerous statement I've ever heard, because that leads you to profiling, to a dangerous profiling. And I don't think that all Muslims are terrorists. Same as I don't think that all short people or tall people or tough people are terrorists. We do know how to differentiate between the majority, the 99.999%, and those single people that we suspect them for some reasons. And once you suspect them, you can send them to the relevant tools. I think that as a state, you should put the relevant tools that will enable to detect the person who is honest. You don't have to see his body naked on the screen. There are many ways to see the hologram of his body and not his body. And whenever you see something, whether a knife or a hand grenade or just something suspicious, so you know where the location, and you ask him a question, and he gives you an answer, and if you are convinced with that answer, so he continues.
Thank you, Avi. To sum up, Errol, what is your take on this problematic subject matter of ethnic profiling?
Well, I think Avi is absolutely correct. This is about knowing your passenger population, and it goes back to a comment he made at the beginning of the show about the inner circle being intelligence and knowing who those people are. He's even more correct with the fact that civil liberties and privacy are not diametrically opposed to security. They can support each other. I think what we miss, particularly in the United States, is an opportunity, as you've done so well here, in educating your public, making them understand what the threat really is, giving them an awareness of what you're doing about it, and having them become part of the system. We are in a risk management business in counterterrorism. We will never, ever eliminate the fact that a terrorist attack can happen. We can do two things. We can reduce the risk, and we can certainly gauge our reaction to it. So what I would suggest is, as you've done here, technologies that are looking for avoidance, deception, and then modifying some behaviors and what people expect at the airport. Years ago, after Richard Reed, we never thought the traveling public would work with us on taking their shoes off, and now they do.
Right.
So it's a matter of behavior modification, education and awareness, and getting people to support you in your efforts so you can look for that individual and not take an entire population of people and waste your scarce resources on people that do not deserve that kind of scrutiny.
Thank you, Errol. To sum up our program, I think that it will be a very focused statement if I would say that it's much easier to be a terrorist than a counter-terrorist. I think we proved it in this program once again. We also,
in any case, I suggest you to become a counter-terrorist person.
I agree with you. I agree with you. And I do believe that we also learned that probably, unfortunately, terrorism is here to stay. And as we can see that, at least until now, aviation terrorism was the epicenter and probably is still going to be the epicenter of modern terrorism. We do have to stress that the public at large has an important role of awareness and also sometimes accept inconveniences in the security process. It's only for his own security. I would like to take this opportunity and to thank everybody that took part in this program. Chagai Ognistanov, Dalit Leder, Hila Oved, Adi Lerner, Ofer Levi, Barak Chaimovich, and especially our distinguished guests, Professor Errol Southers and member of Knesset, Avi Dichter. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.